Okay, so this next episode, Michael Chambers, he's a very experienced sales professional, and he's guided a lot of manufacturers. And so his insight is similar to what we talk about all the time, and that is how best should manufacturers connect with the design community effectively, right? And it has so much less to do with marketing than it does with giving the professionals and the projects what they need in order for products to be well positioned to actually perform well, right?
Yep.
So we so often get caught up in brands and selling and should I help enable a sale of that product on my project? Michael's really looking at this more fundamentally. Like, look, here's what a product does. How, are we sure that we're communicating those fundamentals to the design community so that they best position those for use, right? So he has a lot of insight in connecting and actually more relevance to why we would connect and on what things do we need to work on. So one of his areas of emphasis, has a lot to do with the process of specifying products, which I think for most of us is a bit of a mystery, unless you're in the spec all the time. There are a lot of elements to consider in that spec. And his big point of that's not a place to do any marketing, I think is an important point. He gives a lot of purpose as to why, not to market and what you really do need to include in that. So I know that you've had a lot more experience in the spec than I on various projects. What was it about specifications in particular with Michael that you kind of felt was pretty insightful?
Michael brings decades of experience as an architect to this spec writing process. So he calls himself a spec writer. He's a fellow of the AIA. He's been an architect for a long time. He's worked on the product manufacturing side. So he really does understand, like we do, both sides of this equation and how both sides can be more successful together. So specifically in regards to your question about spec writing, which to your point, not a lot of architects have a lot of experience in. And what can really be a helpful takeaway from this conversation, and I'm not going to give it all away, but he breaks down the different parts of the specification, not into minutia, but just kind of general overview, which every architect would be better served to understand what those three parts are for. And in the third part of the specification, where it really talks about installation of the products, this is where he thinks building product manufacturers can really shine and show the value of their product and also help the product be successful once installed in the building. So he actually says, he makes the distinction. A lot of times people think of the third part of the specification as being the installation part, but he actually says, a lot of products do or don't fail based on the preparation of the substrate, the material, the assembly for the installation of the product. He actually says paint doesn't just fly off the building because it's bad paint, right? It often comes off the building because the area wasn't prepped right. He said so many problems happen because of that incorrect preparation of the application of the product. And so I think this is where architects should really tune in, because if we ultimately want our clients to be happy, we want those warranties to be recognized because things were properly installed. This is something worth paying attention to because it really raises the quality of the project and the satisfaction of the users in the long run.
Absolutely. Yep. No, this is a great episode, and specs are on every project, and he's helping us understand how to do better together. So it's a great episode. Glad you did it.
In this episode, I welcome Michael Chambers, owner of MCA Specifications.
Michael, I would love to hear a little bit of your story. I know I've heard it before, but for recording purposes, I think it would be great for others to hear your story and kind of where you're coming from.
Most of my career has been as an architect, but a technical architect doing specifications. So call me a spec writer.
Okay.
But also over the course of my career, I have sold construction management services. I sold wood doors, worked for the State Department of Education, where I worked with school districts all over the state of California, dealing with site selection and and all kinds of issues for schools. So I've been very fortunate from that point of view that I've done a lot of interesting things as a technical architect. Most of the time those things don't, you tend to be more of a designer or a real sales type and stuff like that. And I'm good at selling too, and I enjoy doing that. But a lot of what I have done as a specifier is try to help manufacturers be more effective working with design professionals. Okay. So part of the challenges is manufacturers, BPMs if you will, don't really understand that architects don't buy things.
Right.
We specify them, we recommend them.
We curate things.
Curate things. Yeah, curate's a great word.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. And so they keep wanting to sell us stuff. And because they're trained as sales types, that's sort of their natural default thing.
Well, because they make stuff, and in the end, they want to sell the stuff that they make, and so they're kind of, it's like a shotgun approach. Everybody gets the same message, right? The contractors and the design professionals, which is not nuanced enough.
No, and it gets really frustrating because over the years, I can't tell you how many times I've had everything from corporation presidents down to field reps say, why won't architects hold their specs? Why I go to all this work, I got the architect to understand, I got them to say, yes, we want to use your product, and then it goes out to bid, and all of a sudden we got substituted out.
Right.
Well, the real bottom line is architects aren't stupid. We're not stupid, but we are abysmally ignorant because of all the things that we have to know.
Right.
I mean, if you talk about knowledge management, it's a tremendous aspect of any role as an architect and as a design professional. So I tried, many times I've written articles about it and talked about it, done presentations, to try and help manufacturers be more effective working with design professionals. And that's one is working with specifications. How do you get specified? And if it is perhaps a government project where it has to be or equal, or it's a really competitive project, how do you control the spec? And controlling spec is not a sole source spec, because I can break any sole source spec known to man. What you want to do is make sure the architect knows who should be specified. So if you happen to have that benefit of being the product, the BPM, who's working with the architect on a particular project, they want to use your product, you need to be able to tell them, yes, you need to specify this one. Here are the competitors who we respect and we want to bid against, because we can compete against these guys. And that's sort of the worst case scenario, but it's logical because of the fact, otherwise if you're happy, you think you got a sole source spec, it says no equal, you're going to get substituted. And you're going to get substituted by price, not by quality. And that's where it's really frustrating for manufacturers to have a quality product and lose out to a much less quality product because it's cheaper. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
It's really, it ends up being substitution abuse, and also poor specs create RFIs. RFIs create all kinds of things and often end up with substitutions because of the fact that the architect didn't really know particularly how this product went together or what it meant to use it. And then in other cases where we get a lot of problems is coordination. Coordination may be one of the top 10 issues for any design professional because this particular product touches other products and things happen. Like the classic example is somebody specifies a 4-wire light fixture, okay, because one of those is a control wire. Somebody substitutes an identical light fixture, but it only has 3 wires, and nobody picks that up because the substitution wasn't done and then all of a sudden you got a light fixture that doesn't work. And now that's my sort of simplest way to put it. There's other things that work that way, but coordination and making sure that your particular product that you're selling that you care about and is important to your company, you got to make sure the architect knows what it means to use it. And I'm finding just in my conversations with BPMs on the floor of the show today is that a lot of them are not talking to the architects, and the architects are not talking to them, and I'm going, who knows more about your product? Nobody. You guys. And sort of the classic one is the first number you ought to know, the only number you need to have memorized as a product rep is the technical guy at the plant who has all the answers.
Right.
I don't care how knowledgeable you are.
Right.
You know, you got to know, go back and talk to the chief engineer, the head chemist, those are the people with the power.
Scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're going to go, oh, wait a minute, this is going to come back and bite me here or this. But yeah, the integration, the coordination, something I don't find people talking about very much.
The coordination, the communication, the education,
Right.
all of those things are such valuable pieces to having a successful outcome, right? And
Right.
and like to your point, if people are avoiding this, you're saying it's coming from both sides, right?
Yeah.
That is disastrous.
Sure.
It causes so much rework, so many RFIs, so many question marks that just cost everybody money down the road. It's insanity.
Yeah. And it really starts at the specification level, which nobody wants to deal with. But a poor specification creates coordination issues, creates substitution opportunities,
Right.
creates RFIs, and
Ultimately change orders.
and ultimately change orders.
Right.
And really trying to rely on the specifier and the design professional to write the appropriate or correct specification isn't very wise, because it blows a hole in your competitive advantage.
Right.
The classic competitive advantage is faster, better, cheaper.
Mhm.
Okay? Well, for me, it's your competitive advantage is, can you tell me what the limitations of your product are? The number one thing I want to know is what your product can't do.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
that appears to be very negative. It is not.
No.
Okay? The second thing is what are the industry issues? How does it go in? Coordination, those kinds of things. And the third thing I want to know is, who are the appropriate competitors? Even if I'm not going to name them in the spec, I want to know who's going to come out there and do it to me.
And if you have a great product, you shouldn't have anything to worry about by serving a design professional with that information.
Well, that's always been my sense of it, because
Yeah.
I can't make I can't give you a competitive advantage in the bidding world.
Right.
Okay, I can give you a competitive advantage in the buying world by making sure your product gets bought out correctly and used appropriately, because the last thing you want is a product failure.
Yeah.
You know, and generally
Absolutely.
speaking, you know, we don't have product failures due to bad products. Almost never. It'd be interesting to do some research and
It
see
would,
what it
yeah,
was.
right.
But I would say 95% of the time our so-called product failures are due to bad install
Yeah.
and bad preparation, the wrong preparation. So again, in
That's in
my
the spec.
mind, yeah, the most important part of the part 3 execution of a specification isn't how to install it, it's how to get ready to install it. Sort of the prep, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't have paint failures. We have substrate failures because it wasn't prepped right.
Right.
You know, paint blows off not because of bad paint, but because
Right.
somebody didn't prep it right.
Right.
Let's take a short break from the interview to tell you about what we're creating for the building industry at Tect. And that is something we call the shortest path from keywords to contact. Why? Because architects are either specifying the same products over and over again on projects, or spending countless hours searching what I call the black hole of Google, because it wasn't made for us, the building industry. And if you're thinking, this is probably just some other product directory, it's not. This is a platform where people find people. Tect provides design professionals with direct access to building product experts, the people behind the products. It's where they can get the help they need from real people with real answers on their terms. Architects like me want an easier way to find expert help, save time, and ultimately get design intent realized without getting on mailing lists and getting inundated with cold calls. If you like what we're doing here on the Peopleverse podcast, I know that you'll find value on Tect as well. I believe in it so much that I left working at a firm to help the entire profession here. So do me a favor and go to tect.com to learn more, and add your name to the list to join our upcoming launch by clicking one of the orange buttons on the page. Again, that's tect.com, and just look for an orange button to join the launch. We're building the platform where people come first. Thank you for listening. Now let's get back to the interview.
I'm interested in your perspective on the product manufacturers specifications and how they're prepared? Like, are they? I hear all the time they're just not up to snuff, and that's because product manufacturers are great at making products, but not necessarily great at all of the other things that go along with doing that business. So if you could just maybe speak to the quality of specifications coming from manufacturers.
Generally speaking, the quality of specifications are not very good because they're either too much. They put in every standard, they put in all the details, every ASTM, with all the things, or they're so thin that there's really nothing actionable there. And so a good guide specification, I mean, when I was selling wood doors, I had no product literature, no nothing. I didn't have a website. All I had was the guide spec that I developed. But I knew wood doors inside out. I knew the two standards that doors were built to and installed to. And I wrote a specification, a guide specification for this is how you write, this is how you specify wood doors. And here are all the edit notes of what's going to bite you and what's going to be a problem for you. I was very effective, and that's what I used for my lunch and learns.
Yeah,
is I just sat there and I didn't have a computer, I didn't have any kind of a presentation, no PowerPoint or anything. Everybody had a copy of that guide spec, and we just walked through it. And I did the same thing for the Tile and Stone Council in Northern California. I put together a tile spec. This is how you specify ceramic tile.
So this model could apply to
it applies
any category.
To any category.
Okay.
And what you do is you got to find somebody that really understands specifications and how to put them together. And then you've got your technical information from the product manufacturer. You put those two things together. And the problem that I find most of the time for manufacturers is they're trying to sell or sole source their product through the specification.
Right.
And what you want is you want to write a good, tight specification that could actually be used. But then you put all the features and benefits and all the sales BS and all that other stuff into the edit notes.
Yeah.
They can be very, very powerful.
Right.
And you can solve a lot of problems. And you got to say, just as much as Master Spec does, and with their guide specs, they have all those blue paragraphs that tell you pick this because of this, pick that because of that.
Right.
There's a lot of experience and a lot of hard knocks that go into those comments. You do the same thing as a guide spec. You put really good technical information, make the spec simple and tight, but then you can put all the fluff you want and all the features and benefits BS that you want. But that's not really what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's not the meat and
so
potatoes.
The balance to me of a really effective guide spec is a hardcore, nasty 3-part specification that just says, this is how you specify the product to make it correct.
Yeah.
And then put in the edit notes and the notes to specifier that allow you to say why you think your product's the best and why you think this is the best way to do it. And it's really quite effective.
For both sides.
I think so, yeah. I think it is possible to have a balanced guide spec, where most of the time guide specs tend to be very biased towards the product and with a lot of sort of hidden stuff that doesn't, they're very partial and they're very biased, where what we really want is something that's non-biased and impartial. So making that balance.
And then it allows those companies to compete
and again,
during the bid.
Features and benefits, while important, are sales things.
Yeah.
And that's how we differentiate ourselves from our competition.
Right.
But in a specification, I'm looking for real industry issues, real technical issues, so that I can get a specification that I know the contractor can deliver on.
If you did have a megaphone and you had one message for the building product manufacturing industry, what would your message be to them? Because you might have already answered this question, but I'm wondering if you maybe even have something bigger.
Well, I'm not sure I've got anything bigger, but let me just go back and underscore, it is possible to be very, very effective with design professionals. But being effective with design professionals means that you have to understand industry issues, you have to be an industry player, you need to know what is going on.
Yeah. And maybe you could speak to this point,
Sure.
which is, you know, a lot of times building product manufacturers are focused on their one product, but you mentioned earlier, it has to interface with all these other in an assembly.
Yeah.
And so being that kind of category expert, we feel, is huge, right? Because
I agree.
If I don't know the right question to ask as a design professional, and you're going to shortcut things that I'm going to find out in 2 weeks that I need to ask, but you could tell me right now.
Oh, it's huge.
That is an enormous advantage.
That is a competitive advantage. That is a competitive advantage because it means you are going to get specified. Whether you get specified, other people get named, who cares?
Right.
As long as you're in the specification, you are not substituting, you're not doing all kinds of stuff. You've done your job. Once your company, product, whatever is named in the specification, you're done. You've been successful. Okay, now you still have to go out and sell the product and work with the subcontractors and do all those kinds of things. But you do it at the highest level of competitive advantage because you're not substituting.
Right.
And you're not
because
saying,
you're in the project early.
Right.
Yeah,
and
that's a huge deal.
And you've educated the architect. So when somebody comes in and says, "Hey, Mr. Architect, Mr. Specifier, well, why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
And they can sit there and
They
tell
have
you.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Substitutions generally come from the design professional's ignorance,
Right.
because they just didn't know, or they got sold a bill of goods
That wasn't the right fit.
that wasn't the right fit,
Yeah.
or just not enough information because the BPMs felt like if they told them too much, it was going to somehow
Sink the deal. Yeah.
sink the deal.
Right,
and
right.
and the deal's so simple, get specified.
Yeah.
But that's my big message of getting, if you want to be effective, get specified.
Yeah.
And now I can go on for hours about how to get specified and how to use specifications. But if you want the big deal,
Well, let's do that.
yeah, get specified. Boom, period.
Nice.
It's not rocket science, but the rocket will fly.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much.
Oh, my
This
pleasure.
has
Thank
been
you,
an
Evan.
absolute pleasure of a conversation, and let's continue the conversation.
I would enjoy doing that
All
very
right.
much.
Hey, before you go, can you do one thing for me? Hit the like button. It really does help us in the YouTube universe. Watching all the way to the end is probably even more helpful, so thank you for that too. It all adds up and helps more people find the show. These are great ways for you to help spread the word and contribute to the Peopleverse. If you want to help the channel even more, please subscribe and use that red button right down there and turn on the notification bell so that you'll know exactly when the next episode comes out. It's completely free to do so. And finally, do you have something to add to this conversation? If you do, leave a comment. I read all of them. I can't wait to share the next conversation with you. So until then, see you soon.